Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today. Thanks for taking time out your schedule. Today we have a special guest. Dr. Leaf is with us. We're happy to have her on. Of course, we'll talk about the brain because she's a neuroscientist, and we'll talk about leadership. Quick background on Dr. Leaf. I'm excited to have her on today. She was born in Africa. Now she lives in America. She just told me about 13 years or so. So that's pretty cool. I'm going one day. Like I said before, she's a neuroscientist. She travels, speaks around the world. She's been studying the brain for about 30 years. And she's been on all sorts of cool shows, TED, Forbes, Oprah Magazine. Has written a number of books that have done exceptionally well. Dr. Leaf, did you want to say anything before we get started?
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me to talk and to share on my knowledge of the mind-brain connection. So it's a passion to help people understand the mind's quite an exciting thing.
Awesome. Okay, so Dr. Leaf, let's just jump in. Talk to us about your new book.
My latest book is called Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, which is quite fun because, and it's the name of my podcast as well. Basically, I've written that book is a culmination of 38 years of work in this field, and I've been studying the mind-brain integration for 38 years. Done clinical trials, developed theories. I worked in clinical practice for 25 years, and I basically talk and teach and write books around the world, train physicians and government and doctors and education and all over the place in spiritual environments, all kinds of places, teaching people about your mind. And it's the reason, and this book is it's helping understand what is the mind, what is the whole mental health system, what's broken in the system, how much control do we have, what is a thought, what are emotions, and all that together. And then I had developed over the years, I have developed and clinically tested and scientifically researched a system for how we can get our mind under control. So how to use our mind to get our messy mind under control to be able to drive the neuroplasticity or the changes inside the brain and the body. And that can be if every single human has a mind. Our mind never stops working. So we all need to know what the mind is and how to manage it, because that's how you live. The difference between a dead person and an alive person is the mind. So mind is vital to understand from a very early age, and and mind, the development of mind is something that happens through our life. And it's kind of a different way of looking at things, because our current narrative is one of mind is brain and brain is mind, and it's the same thing. So this book has been written to help people understand this is what my mind is, these are the thoughts are, memories are, this is what mental health really is. It's not an illness, it's a signal, and how to manage that, and how can we manage our mind, those crazy thoughts, ruminating thoughts, worry, anxiety, depression, all that kind of thing. It's very practical as well, lots of how to's, how to use the neurocycle for different situations like trauma and toxic habits and that kind of thing.
Did you want to talk a little bit more about or dive deeper into the mind brain difference, or are you okay? Did you want to go a
I
little
think
deeper?
no, I think let's talk a bit more about that, because people think that the current narrative for the last 40 years has been that the mind is the brain. So when people talk about my mind, they'll point to their head, and the narrative in the media is mind and brain, and they're used interchangeably, but they're not the same thing. They're two completely separate things. So I'm holding up, for those of you that are listening, I'm holding up a brain and a skull. It's not a real one, but I always like to show this because our brain is basically one. The brain and the body are the physical part of us. You can hold the brain, you can touch the brain and the body. It's a physical part of us, but when you die, the body and brain just disintegrate. So the difference between us having this conversation and the listeners and viewers is our aliveness, and that's mind. Mind is this aliveness, this ability that we have as humans to think and feel and choose in response to all the experiences of life. As we open our eyes in the morning till the time we go to sleep, we are using our mind to process. So on a psychological level, our mind is our thinking, feeling, and choosing, and we think, feel, and choose at 400 billion actions per second all day long while we
It's pretty
are
amazing.
awake. It's crazy. And then at
Pretty amazing.
nighttime, our mind is still working, sorting out what we've done during the day. So during the day, we think, feel, choose in response to life, and we build that thinking, feeling, and choosing into the brain. We literally build it into the brain as a physical thought. So thoughts look like trees, and I'm holding up a little tree in a pot now, a little green tree in a pot. And so the product of mind is that we're going to build thoughts, and thoughts contain all the data. So like right now, people are building a thought of this conversation. So they're building a thought tree so I'm speaking, the mind is processing, think, feel, choose, and all the gravitational fields because the mind's got a whole physics element to it as well. And then the experience of what you're hearing and seeing is being built into the brain in these little protein tree-like structures. So this is what a thought is. So the mind makes thoughts. You with your mind, you are your mind. Your mind makes thoughts. You are thinking, feeling, and choosing in response to what I'm saying. And that's all these electromagnetic sound waves and light waves and gravitational fields and quantum forces that goes through the brain. That connection of those forces, the mind touching the physical, creates this response, and you land up building little protein tree-like structures that are holding everything that you're hearing. So the root system is what I'm saying going into your brain, and the branches are how you interpret what I'm saying. And this is unique for everyone. And then this is how you show up. So if you're going to have a conversation now about this discussion that you're listening to now, after this, and say, oh, thoughts of this, and you talk about what we are discussing now, the only reason you can talk about it is because you've listened, which means that you built the thoughts into that you built the roots into your brain, and then you interpreted it in your unique way, because every one of us is unique. And then this whole thing shows up in what you say and what you do. So everything you say and everything you do is coming from a thought, and the thought was built by your mind, and your mind is therefore driving everything. So it's number one. If we don't understand our mind, if our minds are messy, then our whole brain and body become messy, our whole life becomes messy. And that's why I call the book Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, to understand what mind is and how to manage the mind. So cleaning up your mental mess is mind management. It's managing this whole process. This is a healthy thought. This is a toxic thought. So I've got a wiry tree all the way from Africa, by the way, from South Africa, just as an analogy. And for the listeners, I'm holding up a wiry looking tree with these wiry looking roots and branches. And this is also thought, because trees look like thoughts and you build them with your mind. But this would be a toxic experience. So maybe like isolation in COVID, or loss of finance in COVID, or that argument you had with someone, or that person at work's driving you crazy, or whatever, it's the toxic issue. And that is now in your brain as a distorted version of a healthy thought. And this causes problems. This we need to deal with, because these are the things that affect our concentration, our focus, our cognition, our physical health, everything.
Oh, this question wasn't pre-planned, but while you're talking, something jogged my mind. I've seen it in books, maybe Norman Vincent Peale, a few other writers from the 20th century, they talk about it. But you said while you're sleeping, your mind is still working.
Yes, it never
That
stops.
fascinates me. I don't know if you've done a bit of research on that,
Yes,
but I've also
have.
read before what we do right before we go to sleep. So like the 5 minutes before we snooze off, or the 10 or 15 minutes before we snooze off, are really impactful. So could you talk about that a little bit if you can?
Oh, absolutely, and that's a great question. And yes, the mind. When we talk about the mind, it's such a huge thing. So as I said, mind is how it's psychologically, it's how we think, feel, and choose. And we think, feeling, and choosing at 400 billion actions per second, converting every experience into these trees in the brain. Okay, so we consciously aware. When we awake, we're consciously aware. So there's the conscious mind when we're awake, but there's also another bigger part of mind, and that's called the non-conscious, N-O-N, not unconscious. Unconscious is when you're knocked out from someone hits you on the head, or you have an anesthetic. That's unconscious. I'm talking about the non-conscious. The non-conscious works 24/7. It's the most intelligent part of you. It's the most dynamic part of you. It's where every experience that you've ever had from a certain point in the womb to the age you're at now is swirling, with all of those experiences are swirling in your mind. And your mind is basically in the non-conscious mind, it works 24/7. So it's got all this wisdom, it's got all these experiences, your belief systems, everything you've gone through, you and everything you've experienced are in your non-conscious mind, driving your conscious mind. So your conscious mind's only awake when you're awake, but your non-conscious mind is working 24/7. So at the moment, we're conscious, and our non-conscious mind is working with our conscious mind. And when we sleep at night, our conscious mind switches off and just the non-conscious works. And the non-conscious is working to sort out what you've done during the day. Now, an example of the non-conscious mind working with the conscious mind is you made a statement, I didn't have this question planned, but while you were talking, something came up into my mind and I thought about it. That's an example of, as I gave you, I was speaking, that was an experience, your mind processed it. And as it was processing it, it triggered a question in your non-conscious mind, a thought thoughts in your unconscious mind, which popped up about dreams and about what happens when you're sleeping and that kind of stuff. So that was in your unconscious, and my words triggered that to move from the unconscious to the conscious mind. And then it became a question. So that was something that you've spent time, obviously, reading, thinking about, talking about. And so you have a memory there. You have a thought with memories. Thoughts are made of memories. So the little things here are the memories. The memories are the data, the emotions and the data and all that stuff. And that enabled, that popped up in your conscious mind. And the question came from that thought. And then when you've asked the question, we've answered, it'll slip back into the unconscious mind. And we do that all day long. As you are experiencing everything, we are informed by the existing thoughts that are popping up and down, up and down, up and down.
Gotcha.
From the unconscious.
That's pretty awesome. Okay.
It is. And then at nighttime, we sort out these things. So at nighttime, our unconscious mind does housekeeping because these threaten our survival. So the immune system looks at these toxic thoughts. I'm holding up the toxic thought for the listeners. A toxic thought has a different, has the proteins are all misfolded and it's all like messed up. So your immune system sees this as a threat, exactly like it would see the COVID virus. It's as real as the COVID virus, a toxic issue. So at nighttime, because this threatens your survival, your balance, your wired for love, nature, optimism, bias, got different names. When you're sleeping, we do housekeeping with our unconscious mind to go clean these things up. But there's only a certain amount that you can do when you're asleep, because your unconscious has to work with your conscious to completely eliminate these. So what happens is at night we dream while these things are being sorted out and your brain's regenerating. When you wake up the next day, our dreams are this work spills over into our as we're sleeping, and that's what our dreams are. It's kind of this housekeeping process, and so they can tell us a lot about what's going on in our mind if we and there's no fixed, everyone dreams different things and we can't always interpret our dreams, but they're telling us something, and there's no patterns and there's no cookie cutter approach to dreams because everyone's dreams mean something different, but your dreams can tell you something about the housekeeping that's going on, that there's something going on in your life. And if you tune in through mind management, which is what I teach in my latest book, and for all these years as well, but just very simplified in my latest book, you then can pay attention to signals, because whatever these toxic thoughts have, whatever toxic thoughts we have sometimes from years ago, we suppress stuff. These things are threatening our balance in our brain and our body and increase our vulnerability to disease. So the whole job of the unconscious is to get rid of these and to work with the immune system to get rid of these. So when you're awake, then we get these prompts or these warning signals from our unconscious through the subconscious into our conscious mind of, hey, I'm feeling depressed. Hey, I'm feeling irritable. Hey, I'm feeling frustrated, anxious, panic attacks, weary, my gut's sore. I'm like not operating like I normally do. My concentration's off. So all of those are warning signals. And when we manage that messiness, that's why I call cleaning up your mental mess. Then we are in a process of mind management. We are then standing back and observing those and saying, okay, well, this is what's happening. These are the warning signals. Let me be a thought detective and find out why I'm doing this. And when we do that, then we're cleaning up our mental mess. We're managing our mind. We're increasing our wisdom. We're becoming better leaders, more focused, and all that kind of thing.
Awesome. Okay, I know a few, well, not a few, quite a bit of the listeners will be interested in your research. So I wanted to know, what are you reading right now? Whether that's books, what are you researching, etc.
It's a great question. I read extensively. I read mainly scientific work. I spend at least probably 2 hours every day reading research in my field and doing brain building. And that's another aspect that I bring up in my book, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. Your brain is hungry for knowledge and your mind is hungry for knowledge. So the more you read and study and really not just read like gloss over, but read read to the point where you can actually teach the information, or you're reading to write an exam. When you have that attitude with reading, you actually build tremendous resilience in your brain. So I read, when I read, I do at least 1 to 2 hours a day, if not more, of brain building, and that's around my field of research. So there's lots of books I'm reading in my field and everyday scientific papers, because I write scientific papers too, and it takes a lot of work. Then for relaxation, I do read like Dan Brown or something like that. I'll read, but even then, because my mind is so trained to analyze what I'm reading, I actually find even when I'm reading for relaxation, I'll always see the philosophical and scientific angles of everything. So, but that's just, yeah. So I keep my brain very healthy like that.
I I think the first book I ever read from you is the Switch on Your Brain.
Oh, that came out, yeah, in 2013.
Yeah,
quite a few years ago.
I think that was the first one I read. And I think I finished maybe last week. There's a 365-day switch on your brain book that I think
Okay, the devotion, the daily readings.
daily readings, yeah, 365 days. I think this question applies to what I think I read in there. You talk about multitasking. And I think you said, from what I can recall, I don't have the note in front of me, that we can't do it very well. And I thought I did it pretty well. So do
Well,
you have
I know a lot of people ask me that question. I'm glad you brought that up, and it's a really excellent question because we just defined multitasking incorrectly and looking at it incorrectly. Okay, so here's what happens is that our conscious mind works well with it works fast, but not as fast as the unconscious, but it works on one thing at a time. And even if you don't finish something, the way that the conscious mind is designed to work to improve concentration and focus and to get deep thinking is you got to like really focus on one thing, get it to a point where it's kind of finished, and then do move to the next thing. Because sometimes you are like on the phone and you in a conversation and then a text comes through and you have to end the conversation and read the text because you need to focus on that. Now what people often will do is they think, okay, well, I can read the text and be on the phone. But the minute you start splitting your conscious attention like that, splitting it, your conscious mind is not designed to do that. It'll start, your quality of your attention will start dropping, and over time it will affect concentration and focus. And but on the non-conscious mind, the non-conscious mind is operating at 400 billion actions per second, or 10 to it's actually fast, it's 10 to the 27, which is an inconceivable speed. The conscious mind is actually quite slow. It only works at about 2,000 actions per second. So which is actually fast, but it's slow compared to the non-conscious.
yeah,
So it's meant to be working in like little like this, in packages like that, not in this mushy, mixed up way. And when people think that they're managing multitasking, they've done a lot of research showing that it's literally like putting your head in a Vitamix, but intelligence drops, and intelligence is something that's constantly growing. So it doesn't mean that your intelligence is affected forever, because intelligence is not something static. Intelligence is constantly developing daily as you gain new knowledge. But when you multitask, you drop for that in that time of multitasking, you actually drop your ability to intellectualize about something, and you don't always pick it up until you start feeling brain exhaustion, because multitasking creates brain exhaustion. And then you start thinking, hey, but my mind's going, but my brain's tired. And there's this kind of mismatch between, you feel you still got the energy, but your brain's like, it feels like my brain's tired. And that's very often what multitasking will do. So it drops our intellectual ability, and it exhausts the brain. The non-conscious level is always working. It goes beyond multitasking. It works in present, past, and future. It works at quantum speeds. There isn't even like, it's a whole different level to multitasking. Multitasking is slow for the non-conscious mind. So it kind of works simultaneously.
okay. Thank you. That's a good answer. I have one of my questions relates to COVID-19. I guess they connect your book, Clean Up Your Mental Mess, and COVID-19, what we're all dealing with right now. Um, where's that point? There's this theory called, I've read it a few times, called post-traumatic growth, right? And I don't know if you agree with that theory, you can
Yes.
expand on that. But what do you see, if you do agree with that theory, what do you see coming out of COVID-19 that impacts us as a society at large? If that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. It's a very good question. And first of all, to answer your question, post-traumatic growth, it's actually a concept that humans are really great at getting a concept and then labeling it and helping us in order to help us understand something. So it's definitely a concept, and it's getting more attention, and it's getting more research done. And it's basically, it's exactly what it says it is. You go through a trauma and you grow after the trauma. And I make a statement a lot that in the messiness, we can grow and repair. So we mustn't be scared of messiness. We mustn't be scared of the anxiety and the depression and the frustration and the guilt and the condemnation. All of those emotions which feel so messy, when we embrace them and see them as helpful messengers, we will have post-traumatic growth. We will grow, because in the messiness, when we do that, when we say, okay, I'm feeling very depressed and anxious after COVID because of the way it's affected my life and isolation and whatever. I mean, whatever situation you're in, if you embrace that instead of thinking, oh, that's bad, I've got a mental illness. It's not a mental illness. It's a response to an adverse circumstance. If you embrace it and see it as a helpful messenger, and even though it's kind of messy, by the fact that you are embracing it, you're managing it, and as soon as you're managing it, you can then repair and you can grow. And that's pretty much what post-traumatic growth is, that it's learning from the situation that we've gone through. But you can't just have a trauma and then forget and move on. That's not post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth is when you are able to listen to the signals. So if I hold up my toxic tree, and this toxic tree, as I mentioned, the unconscious mind is going to send us signals that when we've got toxicity, because this toxicity threatens our natural wired for love mode in our psychoneurobiology. So in our brain, brain, body, psychoneurobiology, we see that we don't have structures for toxicity, for anything toxic. So for murder and hate and jealousy and envy and terrible things happen, we don't have structures for that. We don't have, an amygdala isn't there filled with fear. It's amygdala is a structure in the brain that responds to emotional perceptions. So what we see is that everything about us is wired for survival. So anything toxic, like a COVID virus, threatens survival. A toxic thought threatens survival because it's real, and our immune system responds. So when we have when we have a traumatic experience, the experience is in the roots of the tree. Because remember, if you think of it, you plant a seed and it grows roots. That's the source. So whatever you're feeling post-COVID or during COVID, and not that we're really post-COVID yet, but the depression, anxiety, panic, those are not brain diseases. Those are not mental illnesses. Those are warning signals and clues that you have a whole lot of memories in a thought tree around COVID. So here's the COVID toxic tree. I'm pointing to a wiry tree for the listeners. And the root part would be all the experiences during COVID that you've had. And then the branches would be your interpretation of that. And it's pretty toxic and it's kind of scary. So that's producing all these warning signals. So in order for us to have post-traumatic growth, because this is then considered a traumatic toxic thought, it's all this and it's proteins, it's in the brain, it weighs more than a healthy thought. So it can weigh you down, literally. And it's all distorted. So your immune system saying, hey, get rid of this, it's threatening survival, there's inflammation, it affects your DNA, your telomeres on your DNA, which determines cellular health, those will shorten. You'll have a downstream effect with higher levels of cortisol. I mean, I can go on and on. You'll get a lot of vulnerability in our body if we don't deal with this stuff. So you can't just say, okay, COVID's almost over and now I'm going to grow. Growth comes from recognizing the signal, recognizing how you have, where the signal's coming from. So this interpretation, what your thoughts, feelings, and choices are, and then tracking back down to the source, the root of all the things that happen in COVID. So you're going to be a detective. You're going to go from the emotional and physical warning signals to the root system and deconstruct this and reconstruct this into a healthy version. And the healthy version, I'm going to put I'm holding up a green tree and I'm putting a piece of it out. There's this now deconstructed and reconstructed into just the small little thing inside this big tree, this now healthy tree. And so this is my new thought about, okay, COVID was all these terrible things, but this is how I'm going to deal with it. That's post-traumatic growth. That's reconceptualizing the situation. It happened. It has changed our lives. We have to think differently. We have to look at things differently. We have to reconceptualize the situation and and move into a future direction. So out of the messiness, we then repair and we grow. That's pretty much what it means. And that's how we move forward as society. So if you look historically from the beginning of time, adverse circumstances have always happened. It's not like this is the first time. The pandemic, I mean, yes, it's unique in that it's global, but so the Spanish flu is pretty global and the world wars are pretty global. And, so in other words, we've gone through every year there's something. And then there's massive big things like a pandemic and a war and that sort of thing. And every time that humanity goes through this globally, it does shift us to another level and another way of growth. So that's where the post-traumatic growth can come in. So we certainly don't want to go back. I mean, we talk about things, this is our chance now to change things like systemic racism, sexism, all these things that are the societal things that have, this is where we had a very interesting time when COVID's really forced us to face and think about these things. We've had more time to analyze. So I'm hoping that the post-traumatic growth will be one of, hey, we just can't keep doing life like we did. We've got to change systemic racism. We've got to change how we are educating. We've got to change how we're doing politics. We've got to change how we're looking at, the whole gender issue and that kind of stuff. So that's would be the sort of outgrowth of that. And there will be a lot of growth. And I think we really hit a very interesting period. I almost feel like it's kind of another renaissance where things that had tended to rear their head, and you and I know systemic racism has been around forever, but and it rears its head, and then people get all, and then it goes down again. I think now we may have reached a point where we're not going to go back to that, hopefully. And so I think there's going to be a bit more forward growth. So in some areas, I think we'll have that. Mental health has been in a terrible state. They've managed, mental health's always been managed badly, but it's really got bad the last 40 years because now everything is, people's stories don't count anymore. People's unique, people are battling because they've gone through stuff. So if you've lost loved ones and money and your whole lifestyle in COVID, and you're depressed, you don't have a brain disease. You just had a terrible experience, and that's created all this trauma in you, and your body's experienced all this trauma and it's manifesting. So you need help to process that, and you need help to be able to talk and support and all that kind of things. And you've got to change the environment. And we can't just make it all about the individual. It's about us in the environment. We've got to look at our environments. So it's nature, nurture. Nature, in terms of what we have neurobiologically, it is nurture in terms of our upbringing, but our environment, and then it's the I factor. What are we going to do about it? It's all three working together that will really lead to good, healthy post-traumatic growth, and we see the shifts that we should see in society. Because there's a tremendous emphasis currently, and I hope this is going to change post-traumatically, that we'll get post-traumatic growth in the mental health system, because it's also been all made about, okay, like as I said, you go through all this adverse stuff from COVID, and then you get told, oh, you've got clinical depression, you've got a brain disease. You don't have a brain disease. You're depressed because it's such a distortion of the truth. We need to listen to that person's story. So I really hope that mental health management will change, because 100% of people are battling with depression and anxiety, et cetera, in different degrees. It's not that there's a new pandemic or that there's some new thing coming up. It's not going to help just to drug everyone. It's going to make it worse. We have to change how societally, how we talk about mental health. And leaders, new leadership, only 3% of leaders are talking about mental health. And when they do, it's all stigmatized. And that, meanwhile, every 100% of leaders and 100% of people are battling with mental health. And it's not a bad thing. It's okay to be a mess. So that's another reason you asked me. The first question is, why did I write the book? To tell everyone it's okay to be a mess. It's totally okay. Let's just manage it together in a supportive way, and not just, oh gosh, that one's mentally ill, and have this very scary pointing fingers and well, they weird and I'm not. We're all battling. We're all a mess. Let's own it. Let's repair it. Let's grow. So I'm hoping there'll be some post-traumatic growth in that area too.
You talked about the quote unquote negative emotions and in leadership. So, for example, I have a political background. So whether that's politics in a church, in a business, it's go, go, go quite a bit. So I think I heard in one of your talks, you talk about jealousy and envy and how you said it affects the brain and the body. Can you dive a little bit deeper into that? I'm sure some business leaders would like to know about that.
Absolutely. Well, absolutely everything that you think affects the brain and the body. Your mind is what experiences, and your mind moves through your brain. So every moment's a new experience. So your mind's experiencing something new, and when your mind changes, your brain changes. So your mind and brain are always changing. And mind management is you directing that change instead of it just happening. It's happening anyway. So either you can just let it happen in a messy way, or you can manage it. Okay, so when we talk about things like jealousy and envy, etc., jealousy, envy, bitterness, anger, frustration, shame, condemnation, depression, anxiety, all of those are warning signals or clues that if you just keep immersing those, if those clues keep going, and you don't manage them, what will happen is that they actually they create an environment of vulnerability. So if you think of the whole brain and body, and I'm holding up the model of the brain and the body, and if you think of staying in these toxic, having all these toxic emotions and not dealing with why do I have them, not asking the questions, but you just kind of live in them, you'll find them very pervasive. They affect everything. So that jealousy will maybe initially be just about someone's business success, but then it pervades everything, and you find it consuming you. And because it's a toxic energy wave, it creates a toxic pattern in the brain, and that then changes right down to the level of the DNA. It's going to increase inflammation, it's going to increase cortisol, it's going to affect the hormones, it's going to shorten the DNA, which increases biological aging and increases cellular health. This literally is brain damage, and that's why we've got to clean it up. So jealousy and envy are just two of the multitude of emotional warning signals that are telling us that there's a reason why. If you're jealous, why? If you're envious, why? If you are angry, why? Don't be scared of it. Don't be ashamed of it. Use that shame to say, oh, okay, well, I'm ashamed of being jealous. Why? Why am I ashamed? Why am I jealous? Those are all clues. So if you turn this whole thing around and you say, okay, if I keep those, that's that mess. It's this thing in my brain causing a brain damage because the immune system is now creating this inflammation. The inflammation doesn't go away because I haven't dealt with it. It'll only go away when I've dealt with it. And then that creates an autoimmune response, and we start getting all this vulnerability in our brain and our body and all this damage. Or I can say, okay, I own it. I'm feeling shame because I'm guilty. Why? Ask the question, become a thought detective, and then you'll start finding out all this data. The data I'm talking to, we're pointing to the branches of the tree, which are all the memories. What is all the feelings and emotions and thoughts and data? What happened? What's going on here? And then why? Get to the root. And once you do that, then you have shifted the whole process, because now you can say, okay, well, I'm feeling shame and guilt because of this. It inhibits my functioning because my whole body's vulnerable. It will decrease blood flow in the front of the brain, which will increase impulsivity, reduce decision making. Now, as a leader, you want good decision making. You need wisdom. You've got 200 different areas. Your brain is organized into 200 different areas, with each part of your brain having these specialized connections within that. As soon as you are operating in unmanaged mental mess, depression, anxiety, frustration, it's not being managed, those areas start getting very affected. You have the wrong energy levels flowing through them, so the connections don't work like they should. And then the decision making, cognitive fluency, integrative abilities, being able to pull all the rabbits out the hat for decision making, that drops. Focus, concentration, all of that will drop. And as a leader, you're going to drop in your functionality. So it's vital as leaders, as humans, but as leaders, to lead the way in saying, okay, I own this. Why am I doing this? Let me fix this. And then you'll get clarity of thought, and you'll reconceptualize into a healthy thought, which will then give you clearer direction to lead whatever it is that you're doing in business.
Excellent. That really helps. That's helpful. I don't, jealousy and envy aren't typically the things I have to deal with. That's not one of my things. But if it ever comes up, it's helpful to know.
Yeah, or any of those, shame, frustration, irritation, any emotion is a warning
Frustration might be.
signal. Yeah, and the frustration you can use to work for you, because frustration can be very toxic and very brain damaging. But if you're feeling frustration, you just immediately say why, be curious, and then go through the Neuro Cycle, gather awareness, reflect, do the right steps, and get to the active reach, and you'll work out why you're feeling frustrated. Then you can say, okay, what's the solution? And you can reconceptualize it. You can see it in a different way, and then you can progress forward. Then you remove the brain damage aspect and the vulnerability aspect, and you bring health and resilience back into your brain and body. And then you can function at a higher level.
I see. Thank you. Thank you.
And that's what the Neuro Cycle does. That's the Neuro Cycle. That's what I've written about in this book. It's had 38 years of research. So
nice.
It's not.
Can you hold it up again? I like the cover.
Sorry?
I said, can you hold it up again? I like the cover.
Thank you. Yeah, of course. There you go. Cleaning up your mental mess.
I've heard you talk about, well, I think this is what you said. Daydreaming and imagining are actually housekeeping for the brain.
Yes.
Okay, so if that's so, I'm thinking in the future after COVID subsides and hopefully we're back in offices, there's 20, 40, 50 or more people in an office. So let's say you're a supervisor or a manager, for those that are listening, and you have a staff of employees, a group of employees. How do you make that practical? Meaning daydreaming and imagining when we have work to do. How do you make that practical on a work day?
It's a very good question. So basically, daydreaming and imagining, we have the wrong understanding of what they are. What they are basically little brain reboots. So it's literally, you can be in a meeting and you can be looking at the person and you can daydream. And so you can go in and out momentarily just to process. So it gives you a chance to switch off to the external and switch on to the internal. And you can drive yourself in that process. You can literally, if you feel like you really need to think deeply about something that's being said, for a moment, you can honestly take 3 or 4 seconds where you can just literally maybe even look away, or like, move in your chair. And in that moment, you can even shut your eyes for a moment, or whatever you need to do to grab that moment, because in just 3 seconds, you can literally reboot your brain. And especially if you're feeling overwhelmed, I recommend that kind of activity when you're feeling a little overwhelmed in a meeting, or you're getting worked up, or you're starting to feel, and you can preempt that with a little breathing exercise to throw you into that right mode. So you can breathe in for 3 counts, and you breathe out for 7. And so it's in, 2, 3. So you can just do it. I mean, you could just literally be moving in your chair going, and then just like maybe, rub your nose, look away. And in that moment, you switch off to the external, you switch on to the internal, and you just let your mind wander. You just let it flow, and you just let the thoughts flow. So things from your non-conscious will start moving up, and you'll suddenly have lots of thoughts in your head. And that's an excellent way of what we call the default mode network, really starting to just kind of sort things out. Because when you're in an overwhelmed situation, or you've got a lot of thinking, or there's a lot happening, we get a lot of stimulation, your brain gets very tired. And when your brain gets tired, you lose concentration, you lose the ability to see the big picture, you lose that depth of wisdom and introspection that we need, which comes with wisdom. And whereas the daydreaming and that momentary thing just helps to reboot that. Then you can add little fixed periods during the day, like if you at over lunch, if you can just go sit in the sun for 10 minutes and just close your eyes, or just stare, just like sit and try, and don't go on your phone, don't, just let your mind absolutely wander. And it's incredibly interesting. There you've got a bit more time, so you can then almost observe yourself and see what thoughts keep coming up, because that's telling you something. That's obviously at the tip of your consciousness. If something keeps coming up from that means, and when I say coming up from your non-conscious to your conscious mind, it's something that your mind, your non-conscious mind, and your brain and body, which are always a few steps ahead of your conscious mind, when it keeps coming up, that's trying to tell you, hey, this is something you need to pay attention to. So to find the things that you need to pay attention to, why do we need to pay attention to them? Because in some way, they're threatening your survival. They're threatening your wired for love mode. They're threatening your intellect. They're threatening your cognitive fluency. They're threatening your health in some way. There's a multitude of reasons on a degree, levels of degrees. But if whatever's coming up a lot, you need to do something about that. And the daydreaming helps to find those. And then also just the pure exercise helps to reboot and give the brain a rest.
You talked about, okay, that's good today. More daydreaming. But you talked about, I need to do that. You talked about sitting back and being an observer, right? So that when I hear somebody say that, I think of meditation. So because I've been doing it quite a while. It's biblical also. So I'm assuming that you meditate, and it sort of connects with cleaning up your middle mess to me, I think. So if you feel comfortable expanding on it, what type of meditation style do you use if you feel comfortable talking?
Yeah, of course. Well, standing back and observing your own thinking isn't actually meditation. Meditation is something completely different.
Uh,
When I talk about standing back and observing your own thinking, I'm talking about what we call the multiple perspective advantage, which I write about in the book. And it's an ability that we have as humans to stand back and self-regulate, which I mentioned in the beginning. The ability to stand back and watch how you're thinking, feeling, and choosing, how you're responding, how you speak to those people, their responses, and then managing that process. So it's becoming very objective. Meditation per se is becoming mindful of how of what's going on in your mind in the moment. So there's a similarity, it's an awareness, but the multiple perspective advantage, standing back and observing yourself, is it goes beyond mindfulness. So mindfulness, the actual process of doing mindfulness meditation or meditating, is a brain preparation exercise, which I talk about in the book. And I've got an app with the Neuro Cycle app as well, which trains you how to get your mind under control. So when we prepare our brain and our body, we do it with things like breathing, meditation. Now, a lot of meditation tells you that you must just think of the now moment, just be aware of your breathing, your body, and it just helps to center you. But it's not enough to fix the problem. And it does start, and you're never just in the moment. Your mind is always moving through the past, the present, and the future. So this moment is always informed by the present, the past, and the future. What you're just doing is you're just kind of giving your brain a reboot to to, you're forcing your mind to actually let your brain have a bit of a reboot and a relax, to stop the multitude of thoughts that are chaotic, and you're just kind of bringing order back through observing your body. It changes the neurochemistry in the brain and the neurophysiology, and that then helps to shift focus. But you have to go beyond. That's not going to solve the depression or anything like that. It's pure brain preparation. It's getting your neurochemistry and your neurophysiology under control. And then from there, and there's so many different ways of doing meditation. It's an excellent practice, but it's brain preparation. Then you have to go beyond. And that's where the Neuro Cycle comes in, the 5 steps of the Neuro Cycle, which is a system I've developed, which is not a technique. You can put anything into that. It's simply, you can do it in 5 seconds, you can do it in 5 minutes, you can do it in 45 minutes. It has different purposes. So if you're doing it in the moment, you can do it in 5 seconds. It's just a systematic way that when you do the 5 steps, you're lining up the neurophysiology to work with your mind and to get the best out of you. When you use the 5 steps in a very systematic way over 63 days, which you'll see I talk about when you're dealing with a toxic trauma, a suppressed trauma, or a toxic habit you're trying to change, then you're going to work for 15 to 45 minutes daily for 63 days, because that's how long it takes to change a behavior, to change a pattern. It doesn't take 21, it takes 63. And I explain that in detail with examples in the book.
I have a question on productivity. So I just hit 30, so I'm getting up. So as I'm getting older, I'm starting to realize how important my energy is to be productive, right? Over a course of a full day, 24 hours. So, I focus on eating right, exercise, whatever, meditation, reading, et cetera, getting proper sleep. But do you have any tips for us to maintain our energy throughout a full day?
Absolutely. So in the book, in chapter 14, I actually put my daily routine where I put in all the things. And obviously part of it is, fasted workouts and, the healthy eating and all that stuff. But a big part of it is how you wake up in the morning. So there's a whole ton of different techniques that you can do. But one of the first things is that you prepare for sleep in the morning. So when you wake up, as you're coming from wakefulness, from sleep to wakefulness, you have a shift in the neurochemistry and the shift in how the brain information moves from the back to the front of your brain, and different parts of your different chemicals are flowing. And that's a very vulnerable moment. And it's incredibly important at that moment that you become going to your MPA, multiple perspective advantage. How am I waking up? Be very aware of using your wise mind to manage that messy mind moment, because in that moment very often determines and sets the pattern for the day. So in that moment, if you wake up and you feel you're woken up and you're feeling on edge, or you're feeling like complaint already coming out of your mouth, whatever, check that and immediately say, okay, why? Be curious. And you can quickly do a 5-step neurocycle to find, you can do this in like 5 seconds, literally, to just get yourself back on track, because that really is important for setting up the mind, brain, the psychoneuro biology for the day. And then I immediately go from that exercise, I immediately go into brain building. And there's a whole chapter on brain building, and that's where I'll do research, because that then sets up my resilience and intelligence for the day. Then while I'm getting ready, I do detoxing. So if I'm always, because we've all of us have got trauma, all of us are a mess, all of us need to work on stuff. No one's made it. So we should be, it's a lifestyle. Our mind needs to be trained all the time. So I'm always in a 63-day cycle working on something, and then during the course of the day, I do the breaks. Like I said, I'll do the daydreaming breaks in meetings, especially when I'm feeling overwhelmed. During the course of the day, I'll take a couple of 10-minute breaks. I do there's lots of techniques that I've got in the book, like the 10-second pause, and there's a lot of different windows, whatever. There's a whole ton of techniques in there that you can build into the day. But there's a basic framework that isn't, once you understand what I'm doing, it's actually your mind. Here's the key. This is not another wellness technique. This is not another self-help technique. I don't teach that. I teach you as a human. This is your mind. Your mind drives everything. So this is how you get your mind right, so that you can do your leadership, your job, your parenting, your relationship, your exercise, everything properly. So for example, if you don't get your mind right and you go and work out, but you're and your attitude is, oh, I just got to get this workout done, over and done with, that attitude shifts that mind energy goes through the brain, and your DNA shifts into a downward function. You're going to lose up to 80% of the benefit of that workout if your mind's wrong. You may be eating a super healthy, organic, sustainable, farm to table, clean food, but you're worrying about something someone said and you're just like really ruminating on it, you're going to lose up to 86% of that nutrition, even though it's good food, because your mind actually drives your ability of your body to digest the food, right down to your pancreas secreting neuropeptides to digest the food, to assimilate the food. Sorry. So in other words, we've got to think of mind as the number one thing, and we've got to do everything. And mind is always with you. You can go 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water, 3 seconds without, a few minutes without oxygen, but you're not even going 3 seconds without mind. So the top technique for any kind of functioning productivity, increasing productivity, is you've got to understand your mind, and you've got to be constantly regulating your mind and understanding the process. Into the process, which is the Neuro Cycle, you then put everything that you do and all the techniques you like. So all the meditation, exercise, dietary desires, the work you do, but you just do it in this package. It's like I'm giving you the package. It's like Amazon. Amazon has a delivery system. You can put anything in the delivery system. That's what I'm giving. I'm giving you the Amazon of the mind. And when you've got that, your productivity, if you want to know how to be productive, your mind has to be working correctly. It has to be driving the neuroplasticity correctly. And that's what I'm giving you. I'm giving you how to make that a very efficient process.
Awesome.
And then it's huge because you can fit all your uniqueness. It's built for you to put your uniqueness in it. So it's the delivery system. You create your own uniqueness within that.
Awesome. The next two questions, maybe 2 or 3.
I have got literally 3 minutes left.
Oh gosh, okay.
You thought we wouldn't talk for 30 minutes. We've gone for 45, 50
I know.
already.
Sorry about that.
No problem. No problem. I just got the next interview in like 3 minutes.
Okay.
No problem. We can do one more question.
Is there any way, I asked this to another neuroscientist once, Dr. Ladeau at NYU, is there any way to expand our capacity to increase our access to the unconscious mind? So this question for writers, musicians, etc. Is there any way? Because I find a lot of my good ideas come from there.
Okay, so first of all, we've got to define what unconscious and non-conscious
Or
is.
non-conscious, I'm sorry.
Yes. No problem. It's not at all your fault, because even the scientists use it wrong. So unconscious is, and I've got the definitions, there's a whole table in here. Conscious mind is when you're awake. Non-conscious, NON, that's awake 24/7, and that's where your intelligence, your dynamic self-regulation, all your thoughts, belief system, everything, that's where it's happening. That's the hottest part of you, okay? And that drives the conscious mind, and you want them to work together. The subconscious is the bridge between the two. So as earlier on, when you said, oh, I wasn't going to ask this question, but now I'm going to ask it, that was a thought moving from the non-conscious through the subconscious into the conscious. Unconscious is when you get knocked out, someone hit you on the head, or you have an anesthetic. So that's the distinction between them. So the non-conscious is where our wisdom resides and where all our belief systems reside. So the non-conscious at its core is just pure wisdom. It's pure and utter wisdom. And as we spend a lot of time self-regulating, thinking about our thinking, that this mind management is self-regulation. It is thinking, it is basically thinking and observing how you're thinking, feeling, and choosing. As you do that, you then diving into the non-conscious mind. So what I've shown over my research is that when you do the 5 steps of the Neuro Cycle, you are forcing the conscious mind to work with the non-conscious mind through the subconscious. That's what I've been doing 38 years of research on. So the answer to your question is, can you develop? Absolutely. So by using the steps of the non-conscious mind, you can do it for, you want to play the violin, if you want to get more creative in your business, using those steps, you are forcing the conscious and then to listen to the non-conscious, to dig into the depths. So you're getting your messy experimental mind to work with your wise mind. And your wise mind is in the depths of your non-conscious. And it's, if you think of it like a massive forest, this is the easiest way to picture it. Think of a massive forest. It doesn't end. Think of you in a helicopter, you're flying over this forest, and it just like never ends. And you're the pilot, wise, a messy mind, and you're the co-pilot, wise mind. And you're flying over this forest. And in the middle of the forest, there's a strip, and it's beautiful, exquisite, like perfect trees. Around the perfect trees are all these other trees, like beautiful, but not as beautiful. And then there's these dark ones in between. So all these clusters, and those are the toxic issues of our life. So the forest represents every single experience we've ever had in our mind, and that is in our mind and our brain. every experience, and the toxic ones are the toxic ones that we need to deal with because they are viral and they are messing up everything else, and they need to be dealt with because they are threatening survival and the immune system and all that body stuff and telomeres and everything's happening, and our biological age is getting older than our chronological and all that kind of stuff. So but our wise mind's in the middle of that. And so what we want to do is we all use our wise mind every day, but we can develop that. So if someone asks you a question, like when you lead someone and someone comes to you and they ask you a question, and this discussion we're having, we're using our wise mind. We're digging into deep stuff here. This is our wise mind. When you have these analytical kind of discussions, or if someone comes to you and says, "Hey, I got this problem," and then you listen and you give them a great perspective, that's your wise mind speaking. Or when you think, "Hey, this is the right way to do something," and that's your wise mind speaking. So it's there, but as we use the neurocycle, you develop that skill. So I showed with my work that you can improve your ability of the non-conscious conscious discussion and bring out that incredible creativity, which we'll see as increased gamma waves across the brain. You'll see it as, think of the beach, think of the big waves deep out in the sea, and then they get a little bit smaller. I mean, they're huge swells, and then the swells reduce in size, and then they build into a wave with a crest, and they crash on the beach. That wave pattern is what we want in our brain, going across our brain all the time, from side to side, front to back, in a balanced way. So when we are using something like the neurocycle, this process where we're driving the mind to drive the brain, we create that pattern. When we get very depressed, it goes flatline. When we get very anxious, it goes, it's like, the crest, it's like a tsunami just bashing on the beach all the time. So when we use the neurocycle and we start really diving deep into introspecting and that kind of thing, force, because that's what neurocycle will force you to do. As soon as you do that, you increase that beautiful wave flow. And the gammas, imagine little waves on the beach, the ripples on the beach, that's gamma. And gamma will increase and balance across the two sides of the brain, and you become much more creative. So over time, you then get those depths of insight. As that happens, you'll get an increase in delta. Now, you may have read in places that people that have those insightful experiences, and they're praying and they get this like insight, or they play a beautiful piece of music, or they get this, they thinking and they just create something incredible. You get this massive dopamine rush, but you'll also see an increase in delta and theta in the brain, and gamma. There'll be a burst in a healthy sense, and there's this depth of creativity. So there's evidence as you use the neurocycle. I showed with my research specifically that we draw on this. We start bringing out the most phenomenal creativity out of ourselves. So there we go. I've given you the technique for the how-to. So you just got to do the neurocycle, and then there's an app as well. So it makes it really easy.
Thank you so much for coming on. I know you have to go. I'm so excited you came on. I know the listeners are happy. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. We're signing off. Thanks for listening and have a good day.
Thank you. Let us know